Auditing of hardware. Obviously, our hardware has to operate in a secure environment, and this is where maintenance of the hardware and its physical or environmental operating environment is actually so very important. For example, hardware quite often must be maintained and operated within certain limits of temperature. If it gets too hot, we start to have problems. If it's too humid, then we often get condensation and corrosion, or if the humidity is too low, we get static electricity, electrostatic shocks. We also want to ensure that things like our heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems are being properly maintained, that those systems are reliable so that we're not going to have equipment failure because of, say, for example, a failure with the air conditioning system. We want to audit maintenance agreements. Make sure the vendor is living up to the terms of the agreement where they said they would come and do regular maintenance on an air conditioning unit every 6 months, for example. And also, there's one thing we have to remember when it comes to physical security, and that is that physical security overrides technical security. So, for example, if I have a good password, it's really irrelevant if a person can get access to the physical equipment itself. If a person can get in my server room, then they're going to be able to circumvent any of the technical controls we put in place. So a big part of protecting our hardware is also protecting that physical environment that hardware operates in. This requires that we monitor the hardware as well. What is its uptime or availability? Is it working reliably? And of course, what types of errors are we having? What sort of malfunctions or error codes have we had? And have we been looking into those to see if there are problems that should be addressed? It's important to know what hardware we have through some type of asset management and inventory, and of course even equipment utilization reports. We know, is this equipment being used at its, should we say, ideal level of the efficient operation, or is it sitting idle most of the time, or is it in some cases being overutilized and we need to look at backups and additional support? The idea of capacity management then is to ensure that our systems have the capacity to support our current and also of course our future business needs. We'll look at what is the utilization of our central processing units. We'll review and audit network utilization. Is the network being operated efficiently? What are the number of users? This is where we'll also compare the number of users with the number of licenses we have as well. Have we bought far more licenses than we need? Or have we instead found a situation where we may be engaging in software piracy by using then licenses that we have not actually paid for? One thing we should always review is how efficient is the IT operations area in deploying patches, in deploying new technologies, in keeping up with changes within the business world. When a user sends in a request, even for something as simple as a password reset, how quickly are we able to resolve that and help that user to get back into business? We should also audit and review the architecture being used within the organization. The hardware itself, where is it? Where is it located? The software we have, licenses and so on. And making sure we have the proper controls in place to prevent unauthorized access, say for example, to our systems and data. We want to audit and make sure that our networks are correctly configured. Do we have separation between sensitive and non-sensitive areas? Do we have isolation of networks that may contain information that must be protected? We should also make sure that the backups are working correctly. We have a number of different backups we'll use, whether or not they're full backups, differential, incremental backups. We might be using a RAID. We could be using direct attached storage, network attached storage, or of course things like a storage area network. These are all excellent backup solutions. But the important thing for us is, are they working? Are they reliable so that if a file was lost, for example, would we be able to efficiently recover that file? We have to look at things like the age of our backup media. How often has that tape drive already been reused or that tape already been reused? A tape only has a certain lifespan before it's not going to be reliable anymore. We also want to review then the security of our databases. Are our databases configured with being proper patches, access control, proper backups, resilience, so that if there is any problem, certainly we'll be able to continue business operations. And of course, our databases today hold the gold of the kingdom. Almost everything necessary for our business to work is running on some type of a database. We'll check the physical infrastructure, which includes things like proper grounding and earth, then for racks, and of course, secure cabinets, secure wiring closets, as well as the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning we talked about before. If we're using the cloud, do we have then the proper agreements in place so our data will be protected out at the cloud provider, but also protected in transit to the cloud provider as well? When it comes to then auditing software, well, obviously there's a number of different levels of software here. You've got the operating system itself, which interfaces then with the hardware. And the operating system manages all the resources we have, input, output devices, our memory, and so on. And it's really the core of our actual system's operations. Then on top of that, we have a number of different applications. And in here, we can also add in things like the utilities necessary for certain devices to work, drivers and utilities, as well as, of course, you've got in here as well this idea of the hypervisor, which is often another layer. We want to make sure that our applications also are secure and robust. We want to make sure that we have the latest patches of our various utilities. We also want to make sure that all of the calls to our database management system are calling the correct view or the correct subset of the data that that application should see. And usually a call then to a database management system will call a certain view, and that will have been determined by the application that calls that data. We want to make sure that the database management system is working effectively to then manage the data of the organization. We want to make sure our networks are working efficiently and more or less trouble and error free. So we'll certainly review our network software as well. But one of the things that's so important is to review our logs. Many organizations have logs, but maybe they've turned them off. Or they have logs, but maybe nobody ever checks them. As an auditor, we should be checking to see, are there processes in place to review transaction logs on a regular basis. So if there are any problems, we'll be alerted to that as soon as possible. We also, of course, should check job reports and completion logs. Are our various jobs executing and completing correctly? And, of course, we should be auditing the network, monitoring and seeing whether or not the network is being then operated in a secure way. I happen to really like security information and event management systems. I believe there's some very good ones out there in the market today. But I also tend to be cynical. And that is my own personal experience is that many organizations who have invested a lot of money in SIM systems really don't get any benefit from them. A SIM system which brings data from many different points allows us to do analysis, allows us to be able to pick up different types of trends and patterns. They can provide tremendous benefit to an organization. But as with everything else, as an auditor, what are we going to check? Are the people managing those systems even trained appropriately? Are we then working with the vendor to try to make sure we get the maximum benefit from that system we've just bought? As an auditor, we should review incidents, going through the incident logs and see what happened, how was it resolved. If this is happening repeatedly, is there something we need to do, for example, as part of problem management? And of course, we should always check the access logs. Who is trying to get on our system and at what time of the day? And that's where a good access log review can help us in some cases to see where somebody is just trying to do something a little out of character that might be a symptom of the fact that a user account has been compromised. One of the greatest risks for any organization are, of course, the IT department itself. The personnel within the IT department often have privileged access to our systems. They can start systems up, shut them down. In many cases, they have nearly unlimited power over our IT systems. And we can't take that away because that is necessary for our systems to be able to operate correctly. So we want to ensure that staff that has privileged access, we've put in compensating controls. We have layered defense to try to make sure that they're not misusing that privilege. And that, of course, can include things such as then more monitoring, forcing people with privileged access to change their passwords more frequently, additional supervision or processes in place such as dual control, so a person with high-level access still can't do something without the cooperation of somebody else. Certainly, we want to restrict operations to authorized staff, enforcing these ideas of least privilege and logging all of the activity on the system. Who did what? Especially when somebody is gaining access or trying to gain access to some type of sensitive data or sensitive accounts. We should also have a record of any time a change was made on a system. System configuration changes, for example, get reviewed and, well, why was this user account changed? Why was this privileged task run? And we should have that ability, and this is where we have a problem within IT departments, is where quite often you'll find the problem that all of the administrators are sharing the same administrator user ID, which means we don't have individual accountability. And certainly as auditors, we want to make sure that that is noticed and identified to management. We review all changes to user permissions to make sure they were properly authorized. We review all uploads of changes into production to make sure that any change that went into production has, of course, then been properly tested, authorized, documented through following the correct change control procedure.